I want to paint a vivid picture directly for you right now. It's the spring of 1945. And picture the scene on the ground. Berlin is just completely falling apart.
Right.
The streets are literally reduced to burning rubble.
Yeah.
Soviet artillery is just pounding the city into dust, and the Third Reich is collapsing in real time.
Yeah, it's total chaos.
Exactly. And in the absolute thick of that chaos, you have tens of thousands of men with, unimaginable amounts of blood on their hands. And they're desperately looking for a way out.
They're doing the math, right? They
Right.
are calculating their very next move to survive the gallows.
Right. And for a staggering number of them, the answer wasn't about finding a basement somewhere in Europe. The answer was actually looking thousands of miles across the Atlantic Ocean.
It is a profoundly chilling image to start with, because we are talking about a massive, quiet exodus of some of the most notorious criminals in human history, just slipping away to a continent with sympathetic governments, pre-established communities, and the kind of vast geography where a person with a dark past could just completely vanish.
Well, welcome to this custom-tailored deep dive. We have a truly fascinating, deeply dark, and honestly highly detailed stack of sources in front of us today.
We're
Looking at historical archives. We've got decades of investigative journalism and incredibly newly declassified 2025 intelligence reports that are literally just coming to light right now.
The sheer volume of material you've gathered is staggering. I mean, we are analyzing the movements of an estimated, 24,000 to 30,000 Nazis and collaborators?
Yeah, around there.
Who successfully fled to Latin America after the total collapse of Germany. It's massive.
It is. And our mission for you today isn't just to tell you that they escaped. Honestly, that's kind of the easy part.
Yeah.
Our goal today is to unpack how they actually did it.
Right, the mechanics of it.
Exactly. Like, who were the people holding the doors open for them? What were the hidden financial networks that paid for these incredibly elaborate escapes? And crucially, who were the relentless hunters who spent their entire lives tracking them down?
Because it is ultimately a story of a massive systemic failure of international justice.
Yeah.
But, as we comb through these documents, we'll see it's also a story of incredible persistence by individuals who simply refuse to let these men fade into the shadows.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the very first thing we need to do is completely shatter a massive myth I think a lot of us hold.
The 1945 myth.
Yeah. When you picture Nazis hiding out in South America, you naturally assume the timeline starts right there in the rubble of 1945. But looking at these sources, I was shocked. Wait, the first official Nazi Party branch outside Germany was founded in Paraguay in 1929.
1929, yes.
That is 4 years before Adolf Hitler even took power in Germany. I mean, how is that even possible?
It's a phenomenal historical detail, right? And it completely shifts how we have to understand this entire phenomenon. What's fascinating here is that the Nazi Party didn't just, stumble blindly into Latin America after the war, hoping for the best.
They already had a foothold.
More than a foothold. They had been actively building physical and psychological infrastructure there for over a decade. In 1931, the party deliberately created the Auslands organization, or the AO.
And what was their actual game plan with the AO?
Well, its explicit mission was to organize ethnic Germans living outside the Reich. They wanted to construct local, fiercely loyal networks of sympathizers, basically creating what military strategists call a fifth column.
Right, meaning a group within a country at war that is sympathetic to or working for its enemies.
Yeah.
But how do you actually build that in practice?
You infiltrate everyday life. I mean, these weren't just sinister men meeting in dark alleys. They turned existing, deeply rooted German immigrant communities into active ideological agents.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. They took over local German schools, cultural clubs, business guilds. By the late 1930s, you had highly organized chapters operating out in the open in Argentina, Brazil, Chile, Mexico, Colombia.
Operating in the open feels like an understatement, honestly. I mean, the sources detail this massive rally on April 10th, 1938.
Oh, the Luna Park referendum.
Yes, it was held in the Luna Park Arena in Buenos Aires. Thousands and thousands of people gather in this massive stadium to celebrate the Anschluss, the annexation of Austria by Germany. They had banners, uniforms. It was a massive public spectacle.
Absolutely. And the influence went far beyond just public celebrations. The espionage networks they established were incredibly elaborate and heavily funded by Berlin.
Right.
Let's look at Uruguay, for example. A parliamentary investigation at the time documented these intense spy networks operating there. They were engaging in extortion and actively persecuting anti-Nazi residents within the country.
I read the section on Uruguay, and I have to admit it sounded completely unhinged.
It really does.
The sources detail how the Nazis viewed Uruguay as a strategic gateway into the continent. They actually had this absurdly ambitious vision, a Lebensraum dream, where they planned to turn Uruguay into a Nordic agrarian colony.
Yeah, and the local population would be subjugated into a second-class peasantry.
It sounds like pure dystopian fiction.
It does sound like fiction, but you have to remember how seriously they took these ambitions and, how close they were geographically to pulling strings.
Well, yeah. You realize it's not just fiction when you see that the German pocket battleship, the Graf Spee, was literally sunk right off the Uruguayan coast in 1939.
Right, during one of the very first major naval battles of the war.
Exactly. They were physically present in these waters.
They were deeply embedded in the geopolitical fabric of the region. If we connect this to the bigger picture, you look at a country like Bolivia. In 1941, there was a literal plot to overthrow the Bolivian government of Enrique Peñaranda.
Wait, organized by who?
It was uncovered through an intercepted letter signed by Major Elias Belmonte. He was the Bolivian military attaché stationed in Berlin.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he was plotting a coup with pro-Nazi military officers back home. And the plan was to back them up with Nazi colonists who would cross the borders from Argentina and Brazil to seize control.
That completely changes the narrative. So because this ideological, financial, and cultural infrastructure was already thriving and deeply funded across South America, when 1945 rolled around, those fleeing war criminals didn't just have a map.
No, they had a destination.
They had people literally waiting to receive them, which brings up a huge logistical question. How do you move tens of thousands of wanted men across the world?
Right, we have to look at the infamous networks used to smuggle these men out of a devastated Europe, the so-called Ratlines.
I have to share this because it completely changed how I picture this. When you hear the term Ratlines, you immediately picture rats scurrying through dirty subterranean sewers.
Naturally, yeah.
But the nautical origin is actually about the rope used by sailors. It's the rope ladder that serves as a final, desperate route of escape up the mast of a sinking ship. For these fleeing men, the Ratlines were literally their last lifeline as the Third Reich sank.
That is a perfect analogy because it highlights the sheer desperation, but also the practical utility of these routes. However, we do have to be careful to correct popular culture here.
What do you mean?
Well, the Ratlines were not one monolithic supervillain organization with a single mastermind sitting at a desk moving pawns. The historian Uki Gonyu, who did truly groundbreaking archival research on this, he describes the architecture of the escape as a series of concentric rings.
Okay, help me visualize that. Concentric rings of what exactly?
Think of it like a target. The inner ring consisted of the hardcore Nazi escapees and the true believers who were actively organizing the smuggling.
Okay, the core guys.
Right. But they couldn't do it alone. They needed the middle ring. These were ideological sympathizers, maybe local bureaucrats or clergy who would, turn a blind eye or provide a crucial signature.
And the outer ring.
The outer ring was made up of completely oblivious facilitators, neutral shipping companies or humanitarian clerks who just processed the paperwork without actually knowing who was standing in front of them.
So it was a massive decentralized collaboration.
Precisely. And despite being decentralized, the logistics were remarkably consistent. The sources calculate that about 90% of the Nazis who fled continental Europe took the exact same primary route.
Which?
They traveled down from the Alps, crossed the border into Italy, moved down to Rome to secure their papers, and finally boarded ships at the port of Genoa, setting sail for South America.
I'm glad you brought up the popular culture aspect because I think a lot of us grew up with Frederick Forsyth's novels, which popularized this idea of Odessa, this massive secret SS organization with unlimited funds running the whole show from the shadows.
Yes.
But the sources actively push back on that, right?
They do. While an organization called Odessa did exist briefly in the late 1940s to help SS members, researchers conclude it wasn't the omnipotent secret society from the movies.
Right.
It actually ceased operations around 1952. The reality that replaced it was far more disturbing and, honestly, more effective. It was an organization called the Kammerdinwerk, or Comrades Network.
Wait, I saw the name of the founder in the stack, Hans Ulrich Rudel. But he was a pilot, wasn't he? How does a pilot end up running a massive international smuggling ring?
Well, Rudel wasn't just any pilot. He was the most highly decorated Stuka dive bomber pilot of the Second World War.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. A Stuka was a terrifying ground attack aircraft known for its wailing sirens. Rudel was essentially a celebrity among fascists. He was completely unrepentant, fiercely loyal to the ideology, and highly connected.
So he leveraged that.
Exactly. He moved to Argentina in 1948 and essentially dedicated his life to protecting fugitives. He used his celebrity status to deal arms, act as a military advisor to various South American dictatorships, and fund the Camaraden work.
Here's where it gets really interesting for me. Because to get from those mountains in the Alps all the way to the port of Genoa and then onto a boat across the Atlantic, these fugitives needed papers, passports, visas, identity cards.
The most crucial part of the escape.
Exactly. And the institutions that provided them. This is where the history becomes incredibly controversial.
It forces us to look at the actions of deeply respected global institutions during a time of immense post-war chaos.
It's like the International Committee of the Red Cross. They were literally issuing travel documents for Holocaust survivors, for displaced persons who had lost absolutely everything.
Yes.
How on earth do the architects of the Holocaust get in the same line at the same desks and walk away with those exact same humanitarian papers? How does a wanted monster trick a humanitarian organization?
It really comes down to a mixture of institutional exploitation and the mechanics of the deception. You see, the Red Cross humanitarians were completely overwhelmed.
It's too many people.
Exactly. They were dealing with 500,000 undocumented, displaced people wandering Europe. The fugitives couldn't just walk up and say, "Hi, I am Adolf Eichmann." They exploited the system using the middle ring of our concentric circle.
The sympathetic insiders.
Right. They would secure forged Catholic baptismal certificates or identity letters from sympathetic clergy. To a Red Cross clerk who is just drowning in refugees and simply trying to process people quickly, an official-looking church document was all the proof they needed.
To issue a valid travel visa under a fake name.
Precisely. Eichmann, Josef Mengele, Klaus Barbie, they all received Red Cross documents fraudulently this way. The ICRC has historically acknowledged that these men blatantly took advantage of a system designed to help the very people they had just tried to exterminate.
But the Red Cross was tricked by a chaotic system. When we look at the Vatican, the sources show a fundamentally different level of involvement.
This raises an important question about institutional complicity, and, we have to rely strictly on what the historical archives tell us to understand it objectively. The central figure here is Bishop Alice Hudal. He was an Austrian rector of a seminary in Rome. Even before the war ended, he had published a book praising Hitler.
Nice.
Yeah. And after the war, he requested and got permission from the Vatican to visit German-speaking internees in detention camps in Italy.
And he used that pastoral access to systematically get them out.
He did. Hudal was the one providing those fake baptismal records and travel documents. He even sheltered high-level fugitives in his church and a nearby monastery in Rome. We are talking about the absolute worst of the worst here.
Who specifically?
Men like Franz Stangl, the commander of the Treblinka extermination camp, Adolf Eichmann. And Hudal was entirely unapologetic about this. In his later memoirs, he expressed absolute pride in helping these men, viewing them as anti-communist heroes rather than war criminals.
But the question that always comes up is, what did the top leadership know? Like, did Pope Pius XII know this was happening in Rome?
That has been a pivotal historical debate for decades. According to the recently opened Vatican archives, Pope Pius XII and his Secretary of State maintained a deep distrust of Hudal and deliberately kept him at arm's length.
Okay, so they distanced themselves.
Yes, however, the newly available documents also reveal that the Pope still utilized Hudal on certain occasions when it suited the Church's diplomatic needs. The Church's official maintained stance is that Hudal and other sympathetic clerics acted entirely on their own without the approval or mandate of Vatican authorities.
It wasn't just the Church making morally questionable decisions in the post-war landscape, though. The Allies were doing it too. And I have to admit, I really struggled to wrap my head around this one. Klaus Barbie.
The Butcher of Lyon.
Right. He was the head of the Gestapo in Lyon, France. He was personally responsible for the torture and murder of thousands, including children. Yet between 1947 and 1951, the United States Army Counterintelligence Corps, the CIC, actually hired Barbie as a spy.
Yes, they did.
Why on earth would American intelligence actively protect a man responsible for murdering children?
It's a shocking reality of the era. The onset of the Cold War created a chilling pragmatism within intelligence agencies.
The Soviet threat.
Exactly. The Soviet Union went from being an ally to the immediate existential threat. The CIC believed that men like Barbie, who had spent years hunting communists for the Gestapo, possessed invaluable intelligence and tactical networks.
So it was a terrifying calculation of the enemy of my enemy is my friend.
Precisely. And when the French justice system started closing in on Barbie, demanding he face trial for his atrocities, the CIC didn't hand him over.
Unbelievable.
Instead, they provided him with a fake identity, utilized the very ratlines we've been discussing, and personally smuggled him to Bolivia to protect their intelligence asset. It was a stark example of geopolitics completely overriding human justice.
So armed with Red Cross passports, Vatican connections, and sometimes active Allied intelligence protection, these criminals dispersed across Latin America. They were entering regimes that were often eager to use their so-called skills.
Finding new hope.
Yeah. And if we look at where they ended up, Argentina emerges as the ultimate safe haven. The former SS captain Erich Priebke, who lived comfortably there for decades, summed it up perfectly in a quote from the sources.
Yeah.
He said, "In those days, Argentina was a kind of paradise for us."
And it was a paradise intentionally cultivated by the Argentine president, Juan Domingo Perón.
Right.
Perón deeply admired European authoritarian models. He wasn't just passively accepting refugees, he was specifically seeking out useful German scientists, technicians, and military experts to rapidly modernize Argentina's military and industry.
So it was a deliberate recruitment.
Absolutely. Ukigoni's research shows these escape routes weren't just tolerated, they were actively organized with the enthusiastic support of the presidential palace in Buenos Aires.
And the physical depth of that connection in Argentina is still being uncovered right now.
Yeah.
In May 2025, just recently, there was a massive historical discovery right in the basement of the Argentine Supreme Court.
The Nanamaru discovery. It is truly remarkable how history hides in plain sight.
It's insane.
Court officials were clearing out a storage area in the Palace of Tribunals and found 12 heavy wooden boxes. These boxes had arrived in the country way back in 1941 on a Japanese steamship called the Nanamaru.
Sent directly from the German embassy in Tokyo, right?
Yes. And when researchers finally opened them in 2025, they found massive amounts of pristine Nazi propaganda, photographs, and thousands of overseas party membership books, some even bearing Hitler's signature.
It perfectly maps out the exact network of sympathizers that was waiting to receive the fugitives. And that wasn't even the only 2025 revelation to come out of Argentina.
No, it wasn't.
President Javier Milei recently declassified state intelligence archives showing that the Argentine government secretly tracked Josef Mengele, the infamous Angel of Death from Auschwitz in the mid-1950s. They had a detailed dossier on him. They knew exactly where he was. They knew he was living openly in Buenos Aires under his real name.
Under his real name, yeah.
And they did absolutely nothing to apprehend him.
Which perfectly illustrates the sheer impunity they enjoyed under Perón. But, political winds change. When international pressure finally did increase on Argentina in the late 1950s, these men needed new safe havens.
So if Argentina was rolling up the welcome mat, where did they go?
Many moved deeper into the continent. Paraguay became a major secondary hub. The dictator there, General Alfredo Stroessner, had a deep, publicly confessed fascination with the Third Reich.
The sources mentioned Stroessner was practically starstruck by some of these guys.
He was. He cultivated a very close personal relationship with Hans Ulrich Rudel, the Stuka pilot who founded the Kameradenwerk network.
Right, the celebrity pilot.
The historical accounts note that if Rudel showed up unannounced at the presidential palace in Asuncion, Stroessner would cancel whatever official audience he had just to see him immediately.
That's crazy.
And it was through that powerful friendship that Josef Mengele was easily granted a Paraguayan identity card and citizenship when he fled Argentina.
But Paraguay wasn't a paradise for everyone, right? I'm thinking of Eduard Rochman.
Ah, yes. Rochman was known as the Butcher of Riga for his horrific crimes in the Latvian ghettos. He initially fled to Argentina, but when the political heat turned up years later, he escaped to Paraguay.
And things didn't go well for him there.
Not at all. Unlike those protected in high society, Rochman died absolutely destitute and abandoned in a public hospital in Asuncion in 1977. It shows that while the network was vast, the fates of these men varied wildly depending on their usefulness and connections.
And Mengele didn't stay in Paraguay either. He eventually slips into Brazil.
Yes. Brazil served as a quiet, vast sanctuary thanks to its own large, insular German-speaking communities in the south.
So he had blended in.
Basically. Mengele lived out his final years fiercely protected by the Kameradenwerk network in São Paulo. He evaded capture entirely and died a free man, drowning off a beach in 1979 under the fake identity of Wolfgang Gerhardt.
So some died in hospitals, some died on beaches, but some went right back to doing what they did best: Which brings us to Chile. And honestly, this is one of the darkest, most visceral parts of the sources. I'm talking about Colonia Dignidad.
Founded by a man named Paul Schaefer in 1961.
Yeah. If you had to describe Colonia Dignidad to someone, the closest analogy is a dystopian state within a state. It was this secretive cult set up by an ex-Nazi soldier in the remote Chilean countryside.
With horrific conditions.
Electrified wire fences, armed watchtowers, and brutal 12-hour workdays. Schaefer committed horrific systemic abuses against the children living there. But the connection to the government is what's truly terrifying. It became an active tool for Augusto Pinochet's military dictatorship in the 1970s.
That is the terrifying continuity of this history. The brutal techniques of the Third Reich found a literal second life in South America. Pinochet's secret police, known as the DNS, actively used Colonia Dignidad's hidden underground tunnels to interrogate, torture, and murder Chilean political dissidents.
Just incredible.
And you also had figures like Walter Ruff living comfortably in Chile.
Ruff is the man who literally invented the mobile gas chambers used early in the Holocaust, right?
Yes. He was responsible for over 100,000 deaths. Yet he lived openly in Chile and, according to multiple researchers, actively advised the DNA on repressive techniques and interrogation methods.
It is just staggering, the sheer, terrifying impunity. But so what does this all mean for you, the listener? We've talked about the logistics and the destinations, but impunity on this massive scale across multiple countries, it doesn't happen for free.
No, it requires capital.
You have to follow the money.
Yeah.
This massive coordinated relocation was funded by stolen wealth.
Exactly. The Ratlines required a highly sophisticated economic engine. You don't just buy off border guards, Red Cross clerks, and South American politicians with pocket change. The sources point directly to the assets systematically stolen from the Jewish victims of the Holocaust and the plundered wealth of the Reich. And the mechanism for moving that wealth was largely channeled through the Swiss banking system.
How did that actually work, practically speaking? I mean, they couldn't just walk into a bank in Zurich with a bag of looted gold teeth.
No, it was far more insidious than that. During the war, the Nazis moved looted art, gold, and industrial assets into neutral Switzerland. They set up intricate corporate shell companies.
No.
Because of Switzerland's strict, legally enforced banking secrecy laws, the origins of this wealth were completely obfuscated. Fleeing Nazis could then draw on these numbered, anonymous accounts from Buenos Aires or Santiago to fund their new lives and political bribes.
It's the ultimate money laundering operation, and it took decades for there to be any accountability there. A U.S. Senate Judiciary Committee investigation much later found hundreds of accounts in Credit Suisse with direct Nazi links.
Yes.
The international pressure mounted until finally, in 1998, the major Swiss banks agreed to a massive $1.25 billion settlement over Holocaust victim accounts and looted assets.
A historic settlement, but, one that came half a century after the escape.
Right. But while the global institutions and banks were incredibly slow to act, there's a powerful counter-narrative in these sources that we have to highlight.
Yeah.
The hunters.
Yes, the Nazi hunters.
The individuals who completely refused to let the world forget what these men had done, even when governments wanted to move on.
It is the ultimate narrative of human resistance against systemic forgetting. Simon Wiesenthal is perhaps the most famous figure here.
Huh.
He was an architect and a Holocaust survivor who endured 5 different concentration camps. After being liberated, he didn't just try to forget. He opened a documentation center in Austria in 1947 and spent decades painstakingly tracking down these fugitives using index cards and sheer willpower.
And the sources mention a really surprising detail about Wiesenthal from a recent biography. He was actually secretly working for the Israeli intelligence agency, the Mossad, under the codename Theologian.
That's right.
And he was making just $300 a month to do this incredibly dangerous work.
A quiet, relentless, and poorly funded pursuit. Yet, his intelligence gathering was absolutely crucial in tracking down high-profile targets like Franz Stangl in Brazil. And then you have the incredible partnership of Bitte and Serge Klarsfeld.
What was their specific focus?
They dedicated 16 years of their lives specifically to tracking Klaus Barbie, that butcher of Lyon, who the U.S. intelligence agencies had smuggled to Bolivia.
Oh, wow. 16 years.
Yeah. The Klarsfelds applied so much relentless investigative and public political pressure that in 1983, the newly democratic Bolivian government finally caved and expelled Barbie to France, where he was tried and died in prison.
And of course, we can't forget the most cinematic capture of them all, Adolf Eichmann.
May 1960.
Right. The literal architect of the Holocaust logistics is living a quiet life in Buenos Aires, taking the bus to work at a local Mercedes-Benz factory.
Just a normal routine.
Exactly. And a covert Mossad commando team tracks him, grabs him right off the street, sedates him, dresses him up in an El Al airline pilot uniform, and literally smuggles him onto a commercial plane back to Israel where he stood trial and faced the gallows.
It was a watershed moment for international justice. Or consider Eric Priebke, who we mentioned earlier.
The one in Argentina.
Yes. He lived incredibly comfortably in the idyllic mountain town of Bariloche for 40 years. He was the president of the local German-Argentine Association. He felt so utterly untouchable that when an American ABC News journalist finally tracked him down and ambushed him on camera in the street in 1994, Priebke didn't even bother to deny his identity.
That's just wild.
He just stood there and openly defended his war crimes.
And that arrogance was his downfall. He was subsequently extradited to Italy and sentenced to life in prison. I mean, the audacity of these men is just hard to wrap your head around.
It really is.
But it brilliantly highlights the core themes of this massive stack of sources we've looked at today. The escape of tens of thousands of Nazis to Latin America wasn't just a historical accident or a slip-up.
No, not at all.
It was a massive, systemic failure of international justice. It was actively driven by Cold War ideology, profound economic greed, and the willful complicity of governments and revered institutions. But thankfully, it was countered by the fierce, unyielding dedication of a few people who remembered.
And that profound tension between massive systemic complicity and individual memory is what makes this history so absolutely vital to study today. It forces us to examine exactly how easily justice can be subverted when powerful geopolitical interests align to hide the truth.
Which leaves us with a final, lingering question for you, the listener, to ponder on your own. Today, we live in a world defined by absolute digital footprints. We have facial recognition on every corner, instantaneous global communication, and biometric tracking at every border.
Right, there's nowhere to hide.
It's incredibly easy to sit back and think, a mass escape like this, thousands of wanted criminals vanishing, it could never happen now. But consider those 2025 declassified intelligence archives we talked about. They proved that governments back then actually knew exactly where these criminals were.
They had the addresses.
They tracked them to their exact addresses in Buenos Aires, and they simply chose to look the other way because it was geopolitically convenient. So, would modern technology actually stop a mass escape from happening today? Or does a government's willful blindness render even the most advanced digital tracking completely useless?
It is a deeply sobering thought. Technology only serves justice if the institutions wielding that technology actually desire justice in the first place.
Something to think about the next time you picture those men in the spring of 1945, standing in the burning rubble of Berlin, looking out across the Atlantic Ocean, knowing the doors were already wide open for them. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the sources. We'll catch you next time.